This is what we covered in Unit 4, Virginia Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. The following are not covered: non-residential rentals, single-family houses, and condominiums, if the landlord rents a maximum of 4 units. If the rental property is in an area governed by a county executive or manager, the total number of rental units cannot be more than 4. This only applies to those who are natural persons. Landlords are allowed to charge an application fee to a prospective tenant. If the applicant fails to rent the unit and the fee exceeds $32, the landlord shall refund to the applicant within 20 days. If a rental agreement is reached, but the tenant does not live in the property, the landlord may withhold either all of the fee. The landlord can require that a security deposit be paid when the property is leased. It may not be more than 2 months' rent. The landlord shall notify the tenant in writing within 30 days of any deductions to be made from the tenant's security deposit during the course of the tenancy. If a portion of the deposit is withheld, the landlord must give the tenant a written, itemized list of the charges. The final inspection of the property is required by Virginia law to be held within 72 hours of the tenant vacating the property. Tenant must notify in writing if present. If a rental payment is past due, the landlord issues 5-day pay or quit notice. Tenant is given written notice to pay the rent within 5 days or leave the property. Unlawful detainer warrant. Tenant is still obligated to pay rent, but the landlord may begin eviction proceedings. Eviction. Landlord may remove or keep the tenant from the property after the court takes eviction action on the matter. If the tenant violates the lease, the landlord will notify him of such in writing. The tenant will be given 21 days to correct this violation. If it is not corrected, the lease will terminate after 30 days. If the landlord violates the lease, the tenant may notify the landlord of such in writing and allow the landlord 30 days to correct this violation if it is not an emergency. If the landlord does not correct the violation and the tenant still decides to remain living on the property, the tenant must still make rental payments deposited with the General District Court. Other important items. A landlord cannot release the tenant's financial information to a third party, with the exception of rental amounts and record of payments. Most leases have automatic renewal clauses. Any changes to a lease at the time of renewal must be agreed to by the tenant in writing. If the tenant is allowed to sublease, the subleasee must be approved by the landlord within 10 days of written notice. The tenant may not deny reasonable requests. If the tenant is away from the rental property for longer than 7 days, the landlord has the right to enter the property to make sure everything is protected.